Hello, good morning. I will get us started here. It's nice to see you all. My name is Anne. I'm just going to give a quick welcome on behalf of TCG. So thank you for joining us today at Alchemy of High Performing Organizations. We're here with Dr. Zannie Voss, who I know has a great presentation and discussion prepped for you all today. We will be getting into breakout rooms later. But we will begin with a presentation, and there we have it up on the screen now. So I won't stay for too long, but I do want to let you know that we do have captioning this morning provided by Otter. You can access it if you go to the upper left corner of your screen and find the custom streaming service that will open to a link. I'll also be dropping these instructions in the chat in a moment. And we do have ASL interpretation today, and thank you in advance to our lovely team of interpreters who are with us. So again, you should have no issues seeing them throughout, but if you do have questions about how to make sure you're taking advantage of these resources, please do drop them in the chat. I am here to help. And additionally, if you have questions about the presentation as we go on throughout, please do drop them in the chat. We won't necessarily get to them right away, but I know that we'll come back around to them later in the presentation. So with that, I will pass it over to you. Take it away, Zannie.
Thank you so much, Anne. Hey, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this project. A big thank you to the Wallace Foundation for their partnership and support of this research. And thank you to TCG for the opportunity to speak today. What we're going to do is I will share the research questions and methodology that grounded this project, as well as some of the key findings. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms, into breakout discussions for 25 minutes, and then come back and have general discussion. I'm really excited to hear how you respond to this work and how some of these concepts are lived within your own organizations. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my videos so that we can put focus on Brandon and Manny, as well as on the slides, but you'll see me again in just a few moments. And I do want to acknowledge and honor the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic and recent racial and social justice uprisings have really altered U.S. communities in unparalleled ways. You know, this conversation about the link between strategic vision and attaining high performance is really anchored in the present. One of the project participants said, you know, crisis doesn't build character, crisis reveals character. And it's not just individual character, it's character of an organization. Now, the ability to innovate and reconfigure are really critical when the environment is this hostile and this turbulent. Change will happen, for better or for worse. And this presents an opportunity to contemplate the organization's strategic vision, core values, strengths, and purpose coming out of the crisis. So thinking about what is the world we want to see created as we move forward. So this research started out with three questions. The first question is, what are examples of visual and performing arts organizations that have financially outperformed others in substantial ways, or come close to shutting down, or were in the bottom ranking of performers, but engineered a financial turnaround? And to answer that question, we turn to KIPI's, Key Intangible Performance Indicators. I'll explain it in just a second. We analyzed these along 7 financial and operating metrics over a period of 5 to 7 years. We are able to turn to data. So if you have completed one of the TCG's fiscal surveys, or you're a participant in the cultural data profile through a funder, and you've submitted data, we have that data and we integrate it with data about the community that you operate in. After we set context, given who you are and where you operate, we're able to tell whether your organization's performance is exceeding expectations, or perhaps relative to other organizations like yours and communities like yours, not performing as high as they are on particular measures. Having data is the thing that lets us be able to not only provide insights, but also knowledge from those insights over time. So think of it as, for all those times you submitted a survey, that the benefit of survey participation in this case is the potential of getting recognized and celebrated for your exceptional performance on a variety of metrics. So a bit more information about who's contained within these different cohorts and how we got there. So for high performance, we looked at high performance on 4 of 7 metrics for at least 4 out of 7 past years. When we got to turnaround organizations, we decided that we were also going to look and search for articles announcing that an organization's closing, followed by an announcement that it would not go out of business after all. And then we also searched the websites of qualifying organizations for evidence of strategy or acknowledgement of strategy driving recovery. We didn't want to look at organizations that had just kind of a deus ex machina intervention from a large funder, but had no strategy for how it was going to turn around performance. Some of the things we learned in this process were financial distress and bankruptcies tend to make the press only when it concerns a very large organization. Smaller organizations simply went out of business. Numerous organizations, however, that made the press for avoiding bankruptcy have yet to demonstrate that they're on stable footing. There's no evidence in the data of a turnaround, only the fact that they avoided failure. And the vast majority of organizations that performed in the bottom ranking of performers at the start of the period also performed below average at the end of the period, despite some improvement. So if an organization was really scoring very, very low, it seemed to have a difficult time coming out of its situation. However, many organizations that were below average, but not in the very bottom of the ranking, so just below average, at the start of the period, engineered substantial improvement over time, which was really heartening to see. So there's sort of a sweet spot there of having, perhaps not reaching the level of performance you'd like, but having great potential for doing so. In the end, we had 10 high performers and 10 turnaround organizations. You can see the distribution by arts and cultural sector here. For high performers, there were 126 that met the criteria from varying degrees. We looked at strong candidates that provided good sector and size diversity and interviewed 10. The mean budget, so midpoint in the range, was $2 million for both cohorts. And the mean, the average, was about $7 million for both cohorts. But you can see from the budget ranges that was skewed somewhat by some really large organizations. The norm was more in the $2 million range. And here you see the same for turnaround cohort, where we also interviewed 10. So this is identifying organizations who fit these two criteria, high performance and turnaround performance. But we wanted to take it a step further. So we wanted to explore what kinds of strategies were used to achieve this financial performance, and were there particular contexts or conditions in which these strategies seem to be more effective? And of course, this requires talking to people. We followed something that's called a theories in use methodology, which seeks to capture the mental model of how things work from the perspective of individuals who are closest to the problem. So basically, in-depth, hour-long, semi-structured interviews that help us to learn how does success happen from the perspective of these individuals. The time frame of the project was from mid-January until mid-March, just as the COVID pandemic was starting to ramp up. So we were starting to hear the effects of COVID on organizations towards the end of the interview process. And you'll see some of that reflected here as well. Some of the big takeaways from the interviews were just that high-performing organizations were actually once turnaround organizations. You know, we looked at this 5 to 7 year period for turning around, but their turnaround just happened prior to 7 years beforehand. Because of that, we found common strategic elements breed success for both cohorts. There were not significant differences in high performers versus turnaround. They both saw the way success happens very, very similarly. We heard from folks that success takes a slow, controlled burn. There's no single action, there's no miracle moment that's going to provide transformation. So anyone who was looking for just the miracle moment, that's probably not going to be the thing that brings long-term success. We also heard that success is not accidental or haphazard. All interviewees possess a mental map or kind of a playbook for how success happens. And I'm going to share with you that playbook now. at a high level, and then I'm going to break it off kind of into component parts in a bit more detail. It all starts with cornerstones for success. The answers to the question for each organization of how will you have created value and for whom. The cornerstones of high performance appear to lie in the alchemy of high standards in the creation of work that's meaningful to the local community. Therein lies the strategic vision that's interpreted differently for every organization. It's where the value proposition lies. It's a deceptively simple statement, but with profound implications. And some organizations never quite figure out what is going to be their work that's particularly meaningful to the local community. When these elements, these cornerstones are in place, they pave the way for short-term tactical wins that inspire confidence and excitement, build the brand, strengthen relationships with board, employees, and external stakeholders who buy into the organization's strategy for success. So these are the signs, the early signs that the organization is getting traction. Internal and external factors moderate, which means they are either increasing or kind of tamping down the impact of one factor on another. So they are moderating the organization's ability to translate these cornerstones into positive short-term outcomes. External threats to an organization's ability to achieve these short-term gains are downward industry trends in consumer preferences attributable to high-quality substitutes, shifts in institutional funder priorities over time, local population changes, the impact of tax reform on individual contributions as an example of policy changes, and the effects of the COVID-19 virus, which escalated in severity during the course of the interviews, as well as the social justice movement. Internal factors were really profoundly expressed and resonated with all of those whom we interviewed. A strong foundation is maximized when there's mission alignment throughout the organization that permeates decision-making. It flourishes in a positive, open, healthy culture that invites participation. It requires a balance of steadfastness with adaptability and investments in professional staff, as well as a longer-term, multi-year horizon, a longer-term vision. Short-term goals reinforce the organization's strategic vision. The flywheel starts to turn. So what does balanced growth look like when the flywheel starts to turn? It looks like these intermediary outcomes of increased organizational capacity and increased donor and audience participation and engagement. Again, environmental factors come into play. I heard this particularly initially earlier in the summer as organizations that were already kind of in the short-term outcome phase saying when these crises arose, it was really inhibiting their ability to advance to intermediate outcomes, but they still had them in sight. These resource and relationship wins positively impact the organizations in two ways. First, they do reinforce the cornerstones. Second, they lead to financial stability provided the organization has the discipline to stay within its means and make conservative strategic decisions in the face of uncertainty. Since arts and cultural organizations, this model makes it look like the reason for existing is to get to a point of increased financial stability. That's not the case. We exist for mission fulfillment, not financial stability. What we really see here is kind of a virtuous cycle where long-term outcomes of financial stability support the ability to maximize mission success. So now I'm going to break these out into different chunks, and I'm going to share with you a lot of the qualitative input from different study participants so you can get a feel of what's the flesh on the bone of these different concepts. So the cornerstones that constitute necessary conditions, this requires not just one or the other, but both and high quality programming standards and community orientation. Those whom we interviewed said, always work to create transformational experiences that build community. And if you can do that well, everything else will fall into place. Some organizations do what they want to do regardless of whether the audience follows. We don't say, do this, it's good for you. Artistic and programmatic excellence is widely shared as a key strategic goal among all arts and cultural organizations. You see over and over again this commitment to artistic excellence. What a lot of organizations don't really bring into play is community orientation. A community orientation forces organizations to rethink whether and how they serve more segments of the community. When organizations provide programming that makes them relevant only to a small slice of the community, they not only expose themselves to risk when that narrow slice diminishes in size with shifting demographics, but they also miss opportunities to increase their footprint. And so the instinct to ask is, we're providing great programming, why don't those other segments of the community find relevance in it? A community orientation shifts and presses the question of, well, why doesn't the organization provide programming that those other segments of the community would find relevant? Some of the quotes we heard is, I don't believe there's another way to achieve a healthy bottom line than through success in being meaningful to the community. Really serve your audiences, respect them, because they could go elsewhere. Find those things that will resonate with the interests of audiences and donors. Now, your key to survival is for your community to care that you provide programming. Have the wisdom, the humility to be a listening organization. Understanding what programming is going to be meaningful requires getting out of the organization and actually participating reciprocally, listening, learning, responding, all of which lead to relationship building. It requires getting out into local conversations and advancing not only your own mission, but the mission of other organizations. Asking, how can we serve you? How would you like to be involved? As one participant said, ask for the truth and have the humility to hear it. Active program probing and listening are the only ways to discover what people value, what they find meaningful, and what needs they have that the organization can meet. I want to take a moment to kind of root these findings in the present and share with you a couple of kind of thumbnail case studies. This is a watershed moment for all theaters. The crisis of racial and social injustice has laid bare divides in society. It's intensified pre-crisis inequity and polarization that were already in a heightened state. We argue that in providing high quality work that is meaningful to the local community, arts and cultural organizations have an opportunity to take a leadership role by keeping EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, front and center in their sphere of focus as they're reopening their doors. If we leave others behind, we will ultimately be left behind. So how, in thinking about reopening and programming and your cornerstones for success, how will this be an opportunity to send a signal about the role the organization wants to play moving forward in the local community? An opportunity to rethink whether and how to serve more segments of the community. In the report, we include illustrative cases from Dallas Symphony and from the Atlanta Opera. A fabulous example of community orientation is Penumbra Theater's recent evolution to become Penumbra Center for Racial Healing. It'll still perform works from the stage, but also expand its community and racial equity programs. Some of the theaters that participated in this study, Stages in Houston, A Noise Within up in Los Angeles area, wonderful organizations. I'm going to share two more cases from the project that particularly hit on this notion of creation of work that is meaningful to the local community, the community orientation. The first is Classical Theater of Harlem. I had the opportunity to speak with Ty Jones, producing director, and here's what he had to share. He said, we're doing the powerful punch in the gut work. We're making an impact on our local community. That's how you get society to increase its value of the arts. When your back's against the wall, it gives you the courage to fight back. When I took the reins, we were $400,000 in debt. I copied the Obama campaign's micro-donating campaign and asked everyone I knew to make a $10 monthly donation in 2010. That got us some change in the door. It allowed us to do some readings in an inexpensive space. Then someone for the fund for the city of New York recognized what we were doing, and we received a $100,000 grant. Then we got one of the two NEA $90,000 grants for the new play program. All of a sudden, we had $100,000 plus $90,000. We started putting money aside to do contemporary plays and classics. This told the community we weren't dead. The thing to get right is knowing why you're doing what you're doing and take the attention off of yourself. It can be a change. It can be of service to somebody else. Be of service to the community. There are moments when you've made someone forget their pain or been moved. Did we teach them life skills? If you don't have the why down, you're going to spin your wheels. My job is to make sure that people say that you matter and that you're going to come back no matter what. So what it comes down to in the end is sustainability, something for future generations. In order for me to have had success, you have to get a lot of people to listen to you. From there, you create coalition, have a plan, execute the plan, wash, rinse, repeat. Another organization that I wanted to share information on was Anchorage Opera. This is a group, two individuals who came to lead Anchorage Opera from upstate New York. They say we came from upstate New York and we walked into a disaster. We realized the opera needed a new model of programming. Now, for programming purposes, every year we start with a light opera, then we do a socially relevant piece that's a new work, and then we do one of the great top 10 operas. The middle opera each season is now dedicated to a topic that addresses societal demographic of the community. And around each of these productions, we develop ancillary projects in an authentic way that take them out into the community to break down perceptions of what that opera is elite. We sell these out. We get local tango clubs to participate. We get investment in a personal way. People route about their experiences. The first one that we did was so successful, we started expanding on it. We partner with all local communities, more partnerships each year. We get people writing. We've addressed themes related to the Hispanic community locally, LGBTQ, veterans, Native Americans, Japanese Americans. Now, all of these individuals are part of our regular audience. We have pre and post-pay discussions. It's about getting a sense of buy-in. All of our productions of Frida are sold out this year, and the network just keeps growing. You need to be out in the community as much as possible. Come up with ways to give the community, be relevant and be valued. What happens outside of our doors, outside of the opera, is as important to the work on stage. Enrich, collaborate, inspire, one note at a time. Some of the external factors that either enhance or inhibit an organization's ability to translate into short-term wins are external factors. So how does the external environment moderate the organization's ability to cash in on short-term wins? Some of the factors that we heard, we're all dealing with a world where the attention spans are diminishing. We're in an art form that requires 2-hour commitment. People are stressed and looking to hunker down at home, and they have high quality options like Netflix. These were headwinds that the organizations were facing even before the coronavirus came into being. One person said 2019 was harder for us. We started hearing from people that they can no longer itemize and are going to be cutting giving. Who we are is inextricably linked to where we are. Our community is defined by its remoteness and seasonality. We're surrounded by water and very vulnerable. I'm sure that organizations in Northern California and in the Louisiana, Texas, Gulf Coast area are feeling this more than ever right now, and our heart goes out to them. Coronavirus is wreaking havoc on audiences, on artists, on companies. So understanding and acknowledging the fact that getting traction can be inhibited by external factors. Internal factors also come into play. Once there's clarity around an organization's mission, everyone has to align on the mission of the organization. Otherwise, you're always putting out fires. You can't create strategy together if you can't get along together. It says to build trust, be transparent with the board, with staff, and artistic leadership. Honesty is the only way to get everyone to own both successes and the challenges. In the end, you are all in this together, or else everybody loses. We heard with respect to alignment, comments such as from one arts leader, have internal and board agreement on what is core and what is non-core programming, then always protect the core. Non-core has to at least break even or run a surplus to underwrite the core programming. Respondents unanimously brought up this idea of an important, healthy, positive culture. Key characteristics of a healthy culture were repeatedly described as trust, transparency, open communication, participatory management style, a positive sense of energy. This area of trust and transparency was particularly important for organizations that incurred a turnaround. For them, most often, The organization was in its lowest point with a toxic culture where none of the transparency and trust were in place. Getting this right is the thing that was key for them in turning it around. Uh, how do you get from being in a place of either aggression or a spirit of feeling defeated to one of positive, healthy, passionate energy? Our key to success is our cultural values. We've built a culture where everyone has a voice, which creates great buy-in. We live by the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Adaptive capability, innovative solutions and new approaches to programs and problem solving are presenting themselves through clear, open, cross-departmental communication. And in talking to people, going back to them after the crisis had really started to ramp up, one person said, what this pandemic has proven is that we can adapt quickly without sacrificing mission. High performance requires this balance of steadfastness with mission alignment. The ability to see and seize opportunities, even in the midst of a crisis, is really a hallmark of high-performing and turnaround organizations. Know when plans need to be modified in order to stay relevant, and have the intelligence and the wherewithal to understand how how adapting is going to help increase the organization's ability to meet needs. It says people have to believe in a positive future for the organization. Having a multi-year horizon, just the very act in and of itself of creating a roadmap to attaining and retaining financial stability feeds optimism. The short-term outcomes, short-term wins. I love some of these quotes. When you see progress, everyone's attitude changes to become optimistic. You need early wins to push change for momentum's sake. Success breeds success. And I wonder, for those of you listening today, what is that first early success for you, not only during this crisis period, but what's going to be that first success that kind of pushes change coming out of the crisis? Figure out what aspects of your organization are unique and narrow that list to the aspects that people care about. That's where the storytelling starts. Shift the brand. Don't make it about the cult of an artistic leader. Make it about all of the artists, your audience, how you contribute to the community. That's your brand. And when the situation turns around, tell the new story. In doing so, celebrate the community that collectively created the positive trajectory. Don't forget to celebrate community as part of this. When you're transparent and you establish trust with the board, you can go to them with anything. High-functioning boards mobilize to provide resources, leverage their own networks, advocate on behalf of the organization. Arts leaders provided numerous examples of board buy-in that sparked a positive feedback loop of mission-driven governance. One turnaround organizational leader said that he had just joined the organization and realized the extent of debt that the organization had and felt like he had to be transparent with the board. So he went to them, and after he revealed on his first board meeting the depth of the crisis, he said the finance committee chair got up and stood up, and he thought the guy was just going to leave and quit the board, but instead he started applauding. He so appreciated that there was a greater sense of ownership. He said it was the first time in the organization history that they had been dealt with in a transparent and honest way. That generated a wave of giving at the board level that helped to transform the organization. Now, you'll only succeed if people want you to succeed. If they do, they'll be emotionally invested and make sure it happens. It's about building a community of relationships. Again, environmental factors can come into play to mediate the relationship. Eventually, short-term relationship wins are going to lead to intermediate outcomes. So what does balanced growth look like once the flywheel starts to turn? We heard comments like, I don't believe there's another way to achieve a healthy bottom line than through success in being meaningful to the community. Fiscal health depends on it. They have to walk through your doors. We've had significant growth in board support and individual support because we're an institution of this community. They own our success. And there's a tremendous amount of institutional growing up. So when I talk about organizational capacity is growth in human resources, not just financial resources, certainly growth in, you have the audience and donor participation and engagement, but Organizational capacity includes the ability of human resources to grow to serve mission as it increases its footprint, to serve more of the community, more donors. That all requires a greater sense of human resources. So putting processes and professionalism around moving from a company of artists to an institution that feels fully owned and embraced by the community. If we can put the right staff structure in place, we can achieve so much more. In the long term, we can deliver mission better, doing it alongside investing in the art rather than instead of it. And I think about the iron triangle that is purported by nonprofit finance fund of looking at the value proposition, the people proposition, and the profit or the revenue proposition of making sure those three things are in place and balanced in order to achieve success. Ultimately, long-term success can happen, but only for organizations that have the discipline to stay within their means, make conservative, strategic decisions in the face of uncertainty. So under what conditions does growth lead to sustainability? Put in place strict financial control policies that everyone agrees to and adheres to. When you've been through a crisis times together, you appreciate that the protections are there to keep you from ever living through that again. Ultimately, solid strategies lead to financial stability. This was particularly true for turnaround organizations that had an appreciation for financial instability, as most were on the brink of insolvency not that long ago, with smothering debt, with crippling deficits, all deferred revenue spent. It really helped them appreciate the ability to stay within means. Have the discipline to spend your artistic dollar where it really counts, minimize financial risk while increasing the artistic risk. High financial risk drives no appetite for artistic risk. Don't eliminate programming in a down economy, find ways to trim cost, creatively partner. And one person said, I'm judicious with every decision we make. I have to make sure we find success if we just don't have room to fail. And then ultimately long-term outcomes. Financial stability, we selected organizations based on a host of financial and operating metrics. Over and over again, we heard from organizational leaders that for them, stability means a healthy bottom line, healthy working capital, healthy debt ratio. So do we have a solid financial foundation on which we can build vision and mission? And again, while the key to high performance appears to lie in the alchemy of high standards in the creation of work that is meaningful to the local community, it has to be supported by a solid financial foundation. It's not the end result, it's not the end goal, but it's the engine that's going to help organizations continue to enrich that sense of strategic vision. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break into breakout rooms. We'll take 25 minutes and we're going to share these questions with you through chat. But what I'd like for you to consider is reflect on what is surfacing at your own organizations currently in relation to the two cornerstones for success identified in the project: high quality programming standards and community orientation. What challenges or successes related to these two key elements have you experienced in the past 6 months? So looking across all of the different elements of the strategic model, what challenges, successes related to these two key elements have experienced in the past 6 months and during the crisis? And are there other elements of the model that are proving to be particularly critical at this time? A second question is, share examples that you've initiated, witnessed, or experienced of theaters engaging with communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, in mutually beneficial ways. What are the characteristics of authentic partnership? And third, understanding that we are all working under exceptional constraints at the moment, how can this model identified in this study be useful in looking ahead and developing a turnaround strategy within your organizations? Corinna is going to, and then are going to break us out. What I'd like to ask each of you is to remember your breakout room number, because we're going to be calling you, and to ask that one person in each of the breakout rooms be willing to provide one key top line takeaway from your group's discussion. Every group will have 2 minutes when we come back to share some highlights. So I'm going to leave it to Corinna and Ann to go ahead and take us away. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all being beamed back into a group session here. I hope you had rich discussions, and I look forward to kind of hearing key takeaways. And I'll go ahead and get started. If everybody could you just try to keep it to top 2 minutes of what were your key takeaways from your session. And is there somebody from Breakout Room 1 who's willing to step forward?
Hello,
If
I'm
you would
Daniella.
introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, I'm Daniella from Rattlestick. Thank you so much for having this session. It's super relevant, so super grateful to be here. It was just me and Caitlin from the Alley Theater, and we were just talking about the complexity of short-term and long-term planning, and um, what promises you're making to people um, when the given circumstances are changing so much. Um, and we talked about they're creating work in multiple languages, particularly in Spanish, and how meaningful that is to connect to that community. And we just spoke about what community building means.
Great, thank you, Daniela. Breakout room number 2.
Hi, I'm Bob Hupp. I'm the artistic director at Syracuse Stage. It's good to see all of you. Suzanne from the Vineyard Theater, the manager of the Vineyard Theater, and I had a good conversation that somehow through a glitch of technology, we lost our audio into the conversation, but we picked up on the telephone. And really, the things that we talked about, very different organizations, an important organization in New York City and a Lord Theater in upstate New York. Talking about how we both have been exploring ways of really focusing on community in this, particularly after March, but laying the groundwork before that time through strategic planning, through a real focus on transparency in our organization and with our board, but then really focusing on how in this moment of time, as we focus on, particularly a focus on anti-racism, justice and equality, about how at Syracuse Stage, we've worked to pivot towards a focus on our community, lifting up organizations that we've partnered with before, but we're partnering with in more meaningful ways, presenting their work on our stage, turning our theater into basically a television studio to do interviews, to do talks and conversations with local organizations. And that focus has been where we've been, and that's kind of the things, one of the focuses we talked about in our conversation.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Bob. Breakout room number 3.
I guess I can jump in, although I rather wish Vicki would, who's I was chatting with, Director of Development at Contemporary American Theater Festival.
I'm here, Gigi. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
You speak.
Or maybe we can collaborate. For me, particularly, it was a tremendously terrific small period of time because we were talking. I do some work with the Inge Festival Foundation in Kansas, and which operates out of a local small college. So learning from what Vicki is doing, since there's such a fantastic example in terms of working within a rural community, but finding ways to reach new communities within a rural area and to achieve financial support. And she was, I don't think I helped her much, but she helped me a lot, is all I can say in terms of how to, the fantastic, innovative ideas they've had in terms of how to really access support from the community and interpreting community much more broadly, regionally.
So the one thing I would just like to add is one of the things that we did at CATF in response to the murder of George Floyd and what's been happening around the country, we've been using this time of COVID to really take a look at how we can become an even more anti-racist, anti-oppressive arts and cultural organization, and to continue our efforts with EDI. We've been very fortunate. About 2 years ago, we began this work. We brought in Sarah Bellamy from Penumbra to come and help us begin this work with our festival company and our staff. And we're going to be bringing her back, we certainly hope, in our 21 fiscal year to do more work with our board of directors and with the staff. But what we did this summer is, when we normally would do what we call a Day of Giving campaign as we close our festival, because we weren't able to offer our 6 plays before our 5,000 to 6,000 audience members that come from 38 states, we did something virtually. And as a part of that effort, we created what we called the Month of Giving. And we reached out to an organization in our area that does so much for Black and people of color, young women in the West Virginia Eastern Panhandle, and that's the Delta Sigma Theta chapter, their alumni chapter. And so we're going to be giving a significant portion of the gifts that we collected during our month of giving to support this organization, and we want to partner with them to help them do more in our community and our area. And another thing is, though I don't live in Shepherdstown, 3 of my colleagues who do, they are creating an organization, and they want to, through the 3 of them and the resources of the theater, offer opportunities for people to come together and to talk about anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and Black Lives Matter conversations. And they held a sort of a peace conversation at one of the local parks within a handful of weeks of what happened to George Floyd. And I know they're planning to do more.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Vicki. Those are some fabulous ways that organizations are really deeply being meaningful to communities. So thank you for that. Thank you, Gigi. Breakout room number 4. Going once.
Sorry, I was muted. We're a shy bunch, but I'll go ahead and step forward and speak up a little bit. So we put a lot on question 1, and obviously something that we're all talking about in this moment is how to pivot to the digital space. And we talked about the opportunities and the challenges there. Obviously there's a huge opportunity in that you can reach a much wider audience than you can with the constraints of a physical space. And so I know that at my organization and the other organizations in our breakout room, that's something we're thinking really intentionally about how we can do, that we've already done with our digital programming, but how we can do so more moving forward. And then the major challenge that is kind of the elephant in the room is, how can we maintain our high quality programming standards when we are practicing an entirely new art form that we haven't spent the past several decades training for, like we have with live theater and other live arts. So we talked about the duality there. We were also lucky to have a board member from OSF in our breakout room, and she spoke very intelligently to the second question about reaching out to BIPOC communities and how great a job OSF has done, but how it's been a really slow burn and takes an awful long time to build that trust in BIPOC communities, especially when you're a predominantly white institution. And so she offered some of the strategies that they've done, particularly with diversifying the board and working with other community organizations and people of color-led travel organizations, because OSF has such a travel-based audience. So that was nice to hear.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Since we had completed the project, we've gone back to project participants a few times just to check in. And it's interesting to hear so frequently the 2 things that people say they really are drawing on right now in this time of COVID is the community orientation. Because even if you're having to pivot, how do you continue to remain relevant? You have a lot more grace with respect to programming from your community if you're authentically invested in them. that if it is reciprocal, rather than kind of ignoring them and just doing what you want, and the adaptive capability. So having to pivot and knowing how to pivot and acting on that seem to be really interesting kind of key areas that are resonating with a lot of folks, just to share that. Breakout room number 5.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Williams, she, her from Cal Shakes. We had a quite, I would say, like a diverse group of theaters in the room, which was exciting. We had a few Shakespeare and classical companies, a more physical theater-based company, multilingual company, children's theater. So what was, I think, kind of really interesting to see was just like, despite the fact that we're all really working in different communities and all over the country, like this notion of adaptation and pivoting, we spent a lot of time talking about, and how each of our organizations are kind of like dipping our toe into that water, but how necessary it will be just for the financial stability of all of our organizations and for the financial viability of our business model. So I think despite the fact that all of us are coming from very different communities, we were able just to connect over the really the specificity it will take to kind of find the model that will work within all of our institutions, and layer on top of that just the reckoning for racial equity and racial justice within all of the country, and how that adds just like a very necessary layer to the work that we're doing, but also recognizing just how we're all coming at it from a lot of different areas, and some organizations are more equipped than others, but, understanding organizationally how vital it is, and then how do we start to communicate that out to our audiences. So we hit a bunch of different topics, but I think like the top line really felt like the commonality of the struggles and challenges we're all working towards, despite, really the differences within each of our own institutions.
Oh. Great, thank you, Sarah. Anyone else from that group have something to add, or it's good? Group number 6.
So I'm Scott Watson, and I was able to sit in with 3 colleagues in group number 6. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, where I'm the director of the Office of Cultural Affairs, and just by dumb luck, one of our resident constituents, Megan Wildeboer from Pure Theater, was also in the room, along with Bruce Shepard and Aaron Tate. We had a good, I think, amount of commonality, the experience that the persistence and endurance of the pandemic is nothing anybody was really ready for in March. And the quick moves, let's do something novel, let's do something outdoors, let's get virtual. They're kind of Band-Aid fixes and need to be treated in some way as an approach, not a solution. And some specific things, challenges now of securing rights, that when you also want the virtual rights or the ability to live stream plays that you thought the playwright and agent would be happy to have you do, they're not so keen to just farm it out to a regional presenter or theater. So definitely a lot of shared pain and anxiety, but the positives, the takeaways, I think, were specifically taking opportunities like subscription renewal or thanking people for having donated tickets to really re-engage at the board level and from senior management with patrons, and make sure that you're listening to your donors, even if it's somebody who only donated back tickets with a $50 face value. Opportunities to re-engage a board and diversify a board, whether that's strategic planning, whether that's recruitment of board members of color, but focusing on the future with your leadership and governance, and the kind of path forward being uncertain, but wanting to be corrective and addressing blind spots that we've known have been there for years. One person said that they probably speak more with their artistic director now during the pandemic than they would have if they were in production. So I think they're there's a lot to look forward to, but clearly, as we wait to see if we get back to schools, if we have to shut down college campuses, it's really hard to anticipate that moment where we'll be looking for 85% capacity in a packed auditorium with a big line at the concessions.
Thank you, Scott. It's really interesting that you're bringing up a new environmental factor, and that's kind of regulatory issues. So there's this desire to be able to provide digital programming, but what you're encountering with respect to rights, these are unanticipated exterior or external entities that we're going to have to deal with, that can either inhibit or perhaps eventually accelerate the ability to have success. Yesterday I spoke with, did a webinar with one of the study participants who brought up an interesting comment that through the digital programming, one of the challenges of engaging with our institutions, particularly in larger cities, is distance. The burden that it puts on individuals to go long distances, particularly if they're lower income. That the digital offering of programming, perhaps we will rethink our relationship to communities in a digital space by looking at it as the opportunity to help to remove that barrier. There is a sense of, so where can we take it from here? Last but not least, group 7.
I'll start, and maybe Jennifer, you can fill in and help me here. So there were a few things that we touched on the various questions. I think one of them was how to make sure that you're working effectively when a lot of people perhaps are furloughed. If you didn't have a really healthy company culture or a perfectly healthy company culture, which few of us have a perfectly healthy company culture at all times, how to then navigate through the space that we now, when we're really problem solving in a new way with both our staffs and our boards. And we talked a little bit about some strategies, just the frequency of meetings, how we meet, that kind of thing. And we talked a little bit about reopening and how, I don't think as arts organizations, we're super used to, at least my arts organization tends to shy away from taking any stances that could be construed as political. But just opening or not opening can be seen as political in the United States today. And we have constituents who are are patrons of our organization that are on both sides of that coin. And we are making a decision to go one way or the other. There's no way to sit in the middle of that and not make a choice. And so how do you build on hopefully the authentic community engagement that you've had prior and take your patrons and your community members with you through whatever choice you're making. And then we talked a little bit, I think most of the folks in our room were rural organizations in predominantly white areas that were also predominantly white institutions. And so how to authentically work towards different recruitment tactics to hire BIPOC colleagues, and then how to create the ecosystems that support that hiring were some of the things that we touched on. So Jennifer, do you want to add anything?
That was beautifully said. I have nothing to add on. It's perfect. Thank you.
Hey. This is all such rich commentary, and it's really wonderful to hear how these ideas are living within your organizations now. It's too early to know whether all aspects of the organizations that were included in this past study, whether their success are achievable in the current environment, whether some elements that drive success are going to gain and diminish in importance under different unprecedented conditions. We would like to be able to keep this conversation going. And so I know we have just a couple of minutes left. I would like to offer the opportunity, if there are any questions, if you want to go ahead, you don't need to use chat, just to go ahead and ask. I will share, as you're thinking of doing that at this point in time, we've just started working with Wallace Foundation on a companion to this study that will focus exclusively on Alana organizations, on culturally specific organizations. And we're going to be looking at performing arts organizations and community-based organizations, whereas this study was just visual and performing arts, knowing that there's a higher preponderance of organizations of color working in community-based organizations. So look to that coming out sometime probably in January. I will also send out slides from this presentation, and I will include the report. The full report is available on SMU DataArts site as well as the Wallace Foundation site. We'll send a link to it, and it has a lot more on the methodology as well as what we learned, limitations of the study. You know, feel free certainly to share not only the presentation, but that link and that study with others within your organization if you so choose. Any final questions? You guys have been so patient, and I really appreciate the participation, particularly in the breakout rooms. If not, then I'd like to say that the lessons offered here were really intended to help those contemplating sort of the next normal and how to link the present moment to what's going to be your path towards longer term sustainability and strategy. You know, what has happened in the past, we heard over and over from different types of organizations, different sizes, that's how success happened for them. That was their journey, that was their mental model. And I certainly hope that elements of this are useful to you in your own work and in your own organizations as you're contemplating the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over very briefly to Corinna, who's going to close us out and give some more information on how to continue the conversation as part of the community. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Zannie. Can we all give love for those who have not yet given Zannie love in the chat, visually, however you want to do it. We are so grateful to you, Zannie, not just for this report, but for the years and years of collaboration with TCG and so many others in the field. Thank you. And the very short thing I have to say is, like, this conversation is not over. We will be creating a little tiny online community for those of you who want to keep this conversation going, who want to work through the model a little bit more in depth with your peers. Stay tuned for that invitation, and the community will also have all of the resources that Zannie talked about, as well as a connection to Zannie and some of the folks who are doing this work in case you have follow-up questions. So this is not an end, it's just a beginning. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you, Wallace Foundation. Thank you, Zannie, and thanks to all of you for being here today.